Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Councillor Colin Stewart. I am the convener of this new Scrutiny and Performance Committee, and I'd like to welcome all new members of this new committee and officers as well. I'll start by just running through who's at the top table. On my left is Councillor Alistair Bailey, the Vice Convener. On my immediate right is Mr. Danny Williams, Clerk to the committee, and on my far right is Lisa Simpson, the Head of Legal and Governance Services and Lead Officer for the committee. I don't propose to do a roll call, but I will, for the purposes of the record, just say who else is in the room, and if somebody could rise who's online. We have Councillor Frank Smith, Councillor Allen, Councillor Caroline Shires, and Councillor Steve Parr here with us in the chamber.
Yes, thank you, convener. Happy to confirm who is joining us online in terms of elected members. So we've got Councillor Forbes joining us online, Councillor Drysdale, Councillor Massey, Councillor Frampton, and Councillor Robertson. If I've missed anyone, then apologies, and just please let me know as soon as possible.
Thanks very much, Mr. Williams. A few housekeeping items just for those here in the chamber today. There are no fire alarms planned, so if the alarm does ring, then please exit the building by the nearest appropriate fire exit. And I will lead by example in checking that my electronic devices are set to silent mode. This would do the same. Thank you very much. There are no apologies or substitutions, so we'll move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest items on the agenda? No declarations of interest. Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda then is the minute of the meeting of the Scrutiny Committee of 25th April 2022. And we agree the minute of that meeting on a general aye. I actually do need people to say aye or agree. Yeah. Agreed. Thank you very much. In relation to the remaining items on the agenda, can I ask the committee's permission that we take item 6C before item 6A, just due to officer availability? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 4 on the agenda then, scrutiny and performance, future ways of working. So it was just really to make a give the committee, which is after all a new committee, a brief steer about how Bailey and I intend to take matters forward. As a member of Scrutiny Committee for the last 5 years, I do think that we have received reports and we have asked good questions, good information from those reports. But I do think that there is a gap that we need to fill, which is that we need to go further and we need to actually use the Scrutiny and Performance Committee to make recommendations for improvement. The purpose of the Scrutiny and Performance functions is to support the continuous improvement of Perth and Kinross Council's services and policy development. So when reports are brought here, we're not simply going through them for typographical errors or numerical errors or arithmetical errors and pointing those out. We should be coming to a position at the end of each report where we can make recommendations for improvement, and that might be finding gaps in the council's performance and making recommendations for those gaps to be filled and the performance to be improved, or it might be finding examples of good performance and making recommendations that those are shared out across all areas of the Council's delivery. To support this, the first thing that I propose to do is to introduce an action tracker following the meeting. So any items which have been committed to during the meeting, further information to be shared, questions to be answered, that those will be followed up on in a timely manner, and we'll have a tracker that we can see and update, and that will provide direction to officers on making sure that all of the committee's questions and queries have been answered. The second thing is that we will be conducting more scrutiny reviews. So that will be scrutiny and performance reviews. So that will be where members or others have particular areas of concern, and then they would like to bring us to our attention and for us to do a deeper dive into those areas. And you can see that we've got item 5 on the agenda, an update on ongoing scrutiny reviews, and at item 8 on the agenda, a call for topics for future scrutiny and performance reviews. And I'll speak a little bit more about that when we come to item 8 on the agenda. And the next thing that I propose to do is that following that discussion at the end of the meeting, we will have a forward planner for the topics that will come up, so that we're not simply receiving reports that are going to go to other committees for approval and making recommendations on them, that we are doing, as I say, our own scrutiny and performance and making recommendations to them. Is that acceptable to the committee? That sounds like a constructive way of working going forward? Great. I'm getting. Councillor Shire, you want to make a comment? Thanks.
I think on behalf of our group, we're very happy to support working. I suppose the one observation I would make from the previous 5 years, so in comparison to the previous iterations of the council, while I've been hanging around here, is that if a report is recommended from a service committee, and I think one that I personally recommended, it took an awful long time before that was actually dealt with by committee, by scrutiny. And I would very much like to see that we very much tighten up on that, because, you know, there's come and go, councillors' memories are maybe not all they were, you know, and it's very important to me personally that things are dealt with. I mean, can scrutinise a process that's going to gone into a report that's gone to the service committee.
Thanks, Councillor Shires. Completely agree with you, and very happy to make a commitment that that is how matters will run going forward. Okay, if there are no other comments on that item on the agenda, then I'm going to pass to Vice Convener Bailey for an update on scrutiny review.
Thank you, Convener. So this item is just to talk a little about the previous scrutiny reviews that were in progress and weren't yet concluded. My understanding is that a light scrutiny review was previously agreed into a matter that has been referred under 2 different names. One name for it was the Governance Arrangements for Local Action Partnerships. The other name it's been referred to under is Review of Dispersal of Funds to Community Groups under Emergency Powers. However, my understanding is that they're one and the same, that they're different nuances for the same topic. I'd like to therefore invite anyone who has concerns specific to those areas to share those with Councillor Stewart and myself. We'll also email all elected members to ask if anyone else has concerns they'd like to be taken into account for those. And then our intention is to bring a proposal for how those reviews will be conducted to the September meeting of this committee. I believe that's September the 21st. And then that proposal will include a proposed terms of reference for the scrutiny review, a methodology for appointing panel members, and a proposal that we vary the previous decision and hold those review panel meetings in public sessions. So that scrutiny review is the only one that the convener and I are aware of as having been agreed previously by this committee but not yet actioned. However, I'll pause in case there are any questions or comments on that from the committee. Thank you. Back to you, Convener.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Okay, if that's all okay, we will proceed to the next item on the agenda. But I noticed that I did miss out Councillor Robertson with a comment in the chat box. Councillor Robertson, do you want to come in at this point? It may be in relation to.
Thank you, Convener. I was merely going to say, thank you, Convener. I was merely going to say that I warmly welcome your opening comments about the future role of scrutiny. I have to say, I was I wasn't a great fan of the scrutiny function because in its previous years, I never really thought it achieved very much. And surely if scrutiny is going to work, it has to make for a better operating council. And I personally don't remember any really good recommendations coming from scrutiny. So I really welcome your approach to it. I think your apprenticeship serving on scrutiny over the last 5 years has obviously been a very good thing, and you're going to bring forward some of the frustrations you maybe felt sitting on the committee previously. So I'm looking forward to how this committee then now proceeds. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Robertson. Apologies for not keeping up with the chat. Just to reflect on what has been said in the chat, apparently people at home are, sorry, people online, not necessarily at home, are having difficulty hearing us here in the chamber, so just make sure that you're speaking very close to the mic. Okay, we will now proceed to item 6 on the agenda, service annual performance reports and business management and improvement plans. We will take these in the order agreed earlier, which is the communities service report and plan, then corporate and democratic services, and then education and children's services. But I have put an item on the agenda at the end of this section 6D for a general discussion on the format of the annual performance reports and business management and improvement plans. Just as by way of general introduction to all 3 of these, it is worth noting that this is an opportunity for these annual performance reports and business management improvement plans will be considered by each of the appropriate service committees. So while we go through and ask questions of officers about the content of the annual performance reports and the content of the plans going forward, it is also, I will also provide the opportunity at the end of each report for comments in terms of making recommendations to go to those other service or functional committees. For example, if we look at one of the plans, it is worth noting that all of the updates and the key performance indicators are basically the annual performance report bit, and the key areas of focus moving forward are the business management improvement plans. Where you've got key areas of focus for the future years, those should be taken as to be confirmed, and with a blank line at the bottom where we can insert our own recommendations. Where we've got, for example, key performance indicators or updates on areas of performance from the previous year, those particularly in the key performance indicators sections, those targets are for discussion today. So whether we want a target broadened or raised or lowered or tightened, do feel free to make any suggestions that you have. Okay. We will move on to the first of these reports, which is from the Community Service. I'll ask Executive Director Renton to provide an introduction to the report.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, councillors. I have poor connectivity where I am, so apologies, I'll need to keep my camera off this morning. It's my privilege to introduce the Perth and Kinross Council Communities Annual Performance Report Business Management and Improvement Plan for the financial year 21-22. This provides an overview of how the teams within community service have worked together as we continue to deal with the impact of the global pandemic. The report gives an update on the progress made on delivering against strategic objectives as set out within the Council's corporate plan, as well as recognising the challenges faced as a result of COVID-19 and latterly as we sought to support recovery from it. The report is intended to provide a look back at what we said we would do over the 12-month period, and the areas of focus contained within the report is what we have done to deliver on those. The we will section are what we are saying will be the areas of particular focus that we will specifically seek to develop further and improve in this financial year. This document is the high-level planning and monitoring document for the service, and this is underpinned by both divisional plans and team plans. And these are monitored within the service at management level because they're very operational in their nature. I'm delighted that the report highlights some of the positive achievements that we've made against our outcomes and how we've adapted and responded. And hopefully, these are clear within the document before you this morning. But while recognising that, our report also recognises some of the challenges that we still face. And these are shown in the report as priorities for the forthcoming year and beyond, recognising that these will change as we become more aware of impacts on our communities. I remain grateful to all the officers across the service and to all of the elected members for supporting us while we continued to address COVID and as we seek to recover from it. Finally, while we've not got everything right or made the progress that we would necessarily have liked to make during the year, then I think it's fair to recognise that there is still a huge amount of commitment, dedication, passion and compassion from officers across the service. We are, Convener, more than happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Renton. Our first question is from Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I was just wondering, in the introduction down near the bottom of the page, it references the Climate Commission. I'm wondering what relationship might exist between the Climate Commission and the newly formed Climate Committee.
If I may come in
Director
and respond to that question. So there will be a very close link, as you will be aware, hopefully, Councillor Forbes. Then the committee will have 4 non-voting representatives of the Climate Commission, and that will work. They will work together with representation across both sides. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm waiting for the next question. Chat them up. And in the chamber. Vice Convener.
Thank you. My question is related to the measurement of footfall in the city centre. Could someone give us a bit of illustration of how footfall is measured, and is that an estimate or is it an actual raw number from physical counters? Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. If I may come in, there are counters at various points within the city centre on the High Street, and they are used as the measure of footfall.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Shires.
I've got 2 questions. One which follows on from the Vice Convener's comment, actually, and that is about the rural towns and whether they might be, their high street and their footfall also is very important, and whether there's an opportunity for some work to be done to look at them, as like at Law Creek and Ross, like Owry, etc. And my second question is a more general one. And 5, trying to find it. 5.3 in the introduction, it talks about a performance management software system. Wanted a wee bit more detail around that. And it talks about this will change the way in which performance information is reported once implemented, and what we can expect how that will look, and any challenges we can foresee from that.
if I can answer the first part of that question, convener. I understand, Councillor Shires, that there is technology based on Wi-Fi that would allow actual, sort of phone signals to be able to be used to count footfall, and we are looking into that across Perth and Kinross, which will give a very accurate reading of what the footfall's like. But I do not have any timescales for the implementation of that. In terms of the performance management system, I'm just looking to see if Carol Henry, I don't know, Carol, whether you've got anything that you could.
Yeah, I can pick that up, Barbara. Yeah, there's the new system. We're just in the very early stages of implementation. We've only just recently procured the system, but I think what we'll be doing is consulting on the development of how we report, how information is more accessible, how it's not just information on outcomes, it's about the data as well, it's about risk. So it's pulling together all this sort of aspects of performance management and reporting all together, so that it should make the compilation of such reports that's got in front of you today easier. There will be challenges because we're a large organisation. We have the breadth of services that we provide are quite significant, so we'll be taking a planned approach. And I don't know if Paul Davison's on the call, but he is leading on it, so we will be giving more information to yourselves and wider throughout the organisation in the coming months. It may not be ready fully by the next time we have to report to you on performance, so we might need to think about how we do that as an interim measure. But yeah, all of that will get pulled through in due course.
And if I could add that we would all obviously be working with elected members about what the format of reporting would look like as well, because clearly it's allow for decision-led or information-led decision making within services, but also to provide reports that would fall into some of the topics or some of the areas, Councillor Stewart, that you had spoken about at the beginning of the meeting.
I think, Barbara, as well, if I could just add, it's about how we as sort of performance people can actually spend more time, and I think on what Councillor Stewart was saying earlier about doing that analysis. We're so busy now collecting data from all different sources, trying to get the stories about outcomes, and if we can spend more time on doing sort of that analysis and informing decision making rather than the collection, and I think that's the overall aim of the system.
Great, thank you very much for those answers. I think it would be useful for probably for all elected members, but certainly for members of this committee to actually see a demonstration of that software once you've got it up and running, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I mean, sorry to cut over you. Yeah, that would be the plan. There'll be a communication engagement plan, consultation, like I said. So that will be coming hopefully soon.
Great. Thank you very much, Mrs. Hendry. Maybe we can add that as the first action to the tracker. Councillor Forbes, you've got another question.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Page 98 refers to play parks. Now, we know that the Scottish Government made a commitment to replace every play park in Scotland during the course of this Parliament. I'm wondering if Perth and Kinross have had any play parks replaced or renewed by the Scottish Government so far.
Who would like to take that one?
That's a level of detail that, unless Mark Butterworth is on the call, and I'm struggling to see that from where I am. But is Mark? Yeah, Mark's here. Yeah.
Mr. Butterworth, Head of Environmental and Consumer Services.
Yes, thanks, convener. We've certainly received a significant amount of money from the Scottish Government to improve our parks, and we're hoping to receive some more funding as part of the second tranche I haven't got the details in terms of particular parks and the improvements that we've made, but I can certainly provide the committee with a list of those improvements and the list of parks that have received that funding.
Thanks very much. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener. In the report, it talks about the community asset transfer process. I know you'll be making calls for scrutiny areas to consider in the future, but I noticed that it refers in the report to 8 expressions of interest having been received in 21-22. It seems an area that's maybe been a little bit slow to get moving. I know that there have been a number of communities who've kind of started to go down the route and then stopped. And I would hope that it's something that we will be able to process. And just to find out from officers what efforts can be made to speed the process up and make it a bit more user-friendly at the community end.
Thanks, Councillor Shires. Yes, my understanding is that from the introduction of or from the implementation of the Community Empowerment Act in, I think, 2015, we've actually only successfully completed all the way through one community asset transfer. So I think your question is well put, but Mrs. Robertson, Head of Communities, would like to come in and answer that.
Thank you very much, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Shires, for the question. Apologies for not putting my camera on. I've also got connection problems this morning. I think there's a few things to say here, and happy to follow up with more detail out with the meeting, Councillor Shires. The first thing is, yes, I think it's fair to say that we do need to be more joined up around community asset transfers, and a lot of work has been done within the councillor officer level to think about that and make the process as straightforward as it can be for communities. Second thing, however, I would say is community asset transfer is not always right in every situation. Of the 8 expressions of interest that we have had over the past 12 months, we are in discussion with most of those groups to explore alternatives where full responsibility for taking on a local asset is not quite where the group is at, and there are other ways of giving them more direct involvement in managing these local assets like village halls. And third thing to say is we do actually do quite a lot of work and have been commended at national level for the work that we do to promote community asset transfer through infographics, films, information on YouTube and through social media. So although there is work to do, we have made some good progress to date. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. Director Brenton has added a note that the annual report on that subject will be going to Housing and Social Wellbeing Committee next Wednesday. Apologies, Councillor Forbes, I missed out. You wanted to have a follow-up supplementary question on your issue about the play park.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's it probably moved on actually, but I was going to ask Mark for if he had the information to hand. I suspect he doesn't, because I'm sure he would have said, but I just wondered how much money we'd received from the Scottish Government and if any play parks had actually been completed. But I'm pretty confident he will have that to hand, and I'm sure he'll get it to me after the meeting. I'll let Mark answer that for himself.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Forbes. I was actually just looking through my emails at that point to get the exact figure, which apologies I haven't got, but I can certainly provide you with the details and the committee with the details after the meeting.
Thank you, Mark. Cheers.
Okay, that sounds like another action for the tracker. The clerk is busily writing these down. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you, Convener, and I'm also going to have to keep my camera off for the same reason as expressed by colleagues already. I'm on the section in relation to supporting refugees from Ukraine, and you know, I note that 93 people have come into our communities since the outbreak of war in Ukraine, obviously, and a further 267 are looking to come into the area once their visas are processed. Is there any progress from these figures? You know, and are there any delays that are being experienced? It's obviously the sooner these people can get settled in this area, the better. And in particular, that the children can get settled ahead of the new school term in August. I'm just wondering if we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the visa applications, and also, if I may, just to understand what measures are being taken to monitor how the refugees are settling, and if there's any lessons that we can learn for future refugees coming through this programme and others to help people settle. Thank you.
Mrs. Miller, Deputy Director of Communities.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Drysdale. We're having families and individuals arriving on a daily basis. I've just had a conversation with somebody this morning who's expecting a family arriving over the weekend. We can circulate through the next elected members briefing the most up-to-date information and figures. The process now is working really, really well with visas, all of our accommodation checks, disclosure checks, all running through very, very quickly. And I would have to say that we've had really, really positive feedback from community members in terms of that real partnership approach between the council and indeed communities and individuals that are accepting and hosting families from Ukraine. So all working very, very well. In terms of any lessons, I think we're not at that stage yet. Touch wood, everything has gone exceptionally well. We provide that wraparound support. The team that we've got sort of back at the ranch working away to support communities and to support individuals settle in are responding very quickly with any sort of teething issues, whether that be round and about access to benefits, access to employment, access to translation services. And it very much has been a multi-agency partnership. With third sector partners, all partners from across the council and indeed more widely. So no, fortunately for us, no lessons learned as yet, just that kind of real responsiveness as and when any issues or queries arise.
That's good to hear, thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question and answer there. Councillor Forbes, you've got another one.
Sorry, convener, that was an accident.
An accidental question. Okay, that's a novelty. In that case, I'll maybe follow up with a couple of questions then. In the key performance indicators for economic development, we have the number of new businesses started up with support from Business Gateway. And I wonder whether, perhaps using this as an example for what I was talking about in terms of the usefulness and what I think Mrs. Hendry was talking about in terms of actually monitoring and analysing reporting the data, but then analysing it to produce the recommendations for improvement. What is do we know what the gross value added from the Business Gateway support is, and how much the cost per pound generated is?
Again, sorry, convener, I'm struggling to see whether any of David's team is actually in the meeting. If Alison Seggy is here, Alison would be able to sort of outline the position for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, convener. Yes, that's a very good question, Councillor Stewart, convener. It depends on how you actually measure that. We have a number of statistics around number of startups, and we know an overall value of the contract and what's delivered in Perth and Kinross. It's not something we've looked at in any detail, to be honest, but it is something we can take away and have a look at. It's quite a difficult analysis to do. I think one thing I would also make comment on in terms of looking at raw numbers, the startup numbers are good in terms of we've seen continued growth in the number of startups. But one thing that we've actually observed when we were looking at the economic wellbeing plan is that the numbers of self-employed have actually dropped within Perth and Kinross quite significantly. So that's something of concern to us, you know, where on the one hand, we're actually growing the number of startups in terms of year on year through Business Gateway and through GrowBiz. But actually, when you look at the overall numbers of those self-employed, we've seen a significant drop in the last 2 years. So that is something that concerns us and something we also want to look at in terms of why that's happened and how we can then respond to that.
Great, thank you. I think that was, I think what you're touching on there is kind of what I was getting at. A number of businesses started up without the gross value added or without the number of employees that represents and the sustainability of those businesses. You know, did they start up and close after 6 months, or are they still going strong after 3 years? But are there also countervailing economic winds which are affecting, as you say, in this case, self-employed? These sort of stark numbers don't really help us to get into the detail of actually, you know, the whether the council is getting best value for the public pound in terms of economic development within Perth and Kinross. But I think the commitment there, thank you, Mrs. Seggie, to look at these numbers in a wee bit more detail is helpful. And I'll maybe give another sort of specific question, but which could be used to illustrate another general point, if that's okay. If we look at housing, and for example, we take the average days in temporary accommodation, where we do seem to be doing, I think, if I recall correctly, substantially better than the national average and below our target numbers. And also the average time in days taken to complete approved applications for medical adaptations. Again, a good average figure. But obviously those averages, that is an average, and there will be outliers against that average, and that will have, you know, a significant effect on those people who are the outlying statistics. So do we know what the outliers in terms of these averages are, and how are we attempting to bring those down? Mrs. Mailer, I presume?
Yes, thank you for your question, convener. I don't have the specifics in terms of the outliers, but I do think that that is a good question. I think in terms of both of those indicators. So in terms of adaptation, some of the adaptations are sort of fairly straightforward and quick for us to undertake, relatively minor. Other adaptations, so in some cases we will build an extension on somebody's home that is fully adapted. That obviously will take a significantly longer period of time, and obviously will bring the average sort of up. So we will have that information, and I can pass that on if that would be valuable to you. We can do that. And similarly, in terms of average time in temporary accommodation, sometimes people literally will be in and out in a few days. Others will stay for longer periods as we're trying to secure them some suitable accommodation in their areas of choice if we're having difficulty in identifying something for them. So yeah, take on board your point in terms of that kind of understanding of where the average fits and what the outliers are, so we can get some more detailed information to you on that.
Thank you very much. Have we got any more questions? I'm not seeing any more. Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much. Here we go. Red's back on again. Yeah. Now, this could be one of these dumb questions, okay? It's regarding delivery plan, the investments in the roads, etc. Okay. Now, I notice here what we've done very well on the roads in the last administration. Okay. What is the future as regarding road improvement? My observation of roads, and this again could be wrong, is that the road network that we have could be vastly improved if we had a real big look at it and got, for instance, water off the road, improved our ditches, get the water off to save any real problems. Now, I know restraints could be on the etc. So just to follow up on the road improvements. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Smith. When we're looking at these types of reports, there is no such thing as a stupid question, so please carry on. Mr. Butterworth, I think, will want to come in on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. No, it's absolutely not a stupid question. I think, you know, it's already been pointed out, we did significantly well last year. The council put additional resources into the programme. We made significant amounts of improvement, and hopefully with the continued investment, that improvement will continue. I think, unfortunately, whereas there are a number of ways of doing things and improving things, the Perth and Kinross offer is another way of improving things. A lot of water on the road comes off private land, so we need to work with private landowners and see what they can do. But fundamentally, I think the answer to this is one of investment. You know, there is, I think it's around 2,500, 3,000 kilometres of roads across Perth and Kinross, and they need constant investment. So whereas we're always looking for better ways and different ways of doing things, and as I said, working with landowners, particularly around water from private lands getting onto the road, it is effectively about continued investment and long-term investment. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, Councillor Smith. Great, thank you. Councillor Allen.
Hiya, and once again, this is my first ever meeting, so whether it's a strange question or otherwise, you can judge. I'm looking at promoting a prosperous, sustainable and inclusive economy. On there, we talk about how we're going to continue with the private sector to ensure all households across Perth and Kinross can access super fast broadband, that key settlements have access to a full fibre network. I find that quite interesting given some of the problems we've already had in here today. But do we know what the commitments of the Scottish Government are, and will we ever reach that commitment?
If you could just unmute your mic, Councillor Allen. Thank you. I think I'm happy to receive strange questions as well, so that's fine. I'm not sure if you would like to come in on that. Mrs. Seggy, please.
Thank you for the question. No, it's a very important question in terms of our overall economic prosperity going forward. We have invested quite heavily with some additional money from Tay City's deal and from the UK government in what we know as the local full fibre network, and that is to connect 136 council buildings. That programme started last year and is now being complete in terms of the physical works. We're now doing the kind of digital connections to those buildings. And the benefit of that investment is that properties in a surrounding area will be able to tap into that superfast broadband. However, that's only one element of what we're trying to do. The Scottish Government programme you refer to is actually the R100 programme, and there have been issues and concerns with that in terms of speed and progress, particularly in our more rural areas. There are vouchers available to householders and to businesses, and it's actually something we're actively looking at with partners. We have a digital board across our Tay Cities partnership, and it's something we're working with colleagues in Angus, Dundee and Fife in terms of trying to create an approach around supporting communities and businesses to access those vouchers. So it's an ongoing issue. It's something we're actively looking at, and it's very important for our future in terms of our connectivity.
Okay, thanks. And maybe if I could follow up with one there. In terms of the where the connections have been made to the public building and that being accessible, providing the access route to local residents, how do local residents know, and how do they actually access those broadband connections?
That's a very good question, convener. We're working on a kind of communications protocol on that to ensure that residents, because it's only within a certain geography in terms of a few hundred, several, I think it's about 1,000 metres from the actual connection that we've made. So we're working with the providers in terms of how we can get comms out around that. As I say, some of those connections aren't actually formally lit up yet, so they're not live. That process is just ongoing, but as soon as that becomes live, we will start some comms with local businesses and local residents about how they can actually access that super fast connectivity themselves.
Great, thank you. That will be of relief to certainly some of my residents, but I think Councillor Shires wants to follow-up question, so she maybe has constituents or herself in that situation.
As one of the residents in your ward, Councillor Stewart, you'll know this is close to my heart. Is there a timescale for all of that, for the communications plan and the implementation and making, because I mean, people are just desperate. The experience of the last 2 years has not been a pleasurable one for many people, and anybody that can be helped by this programme will be delighted to hear it.
Thank you for the follow-up. Yes, Councillor Shears, there is a timetable in terms of the connections. The majority of those connections will be complete by the end of the summer, with just a couple outstanding to be completed by the end of the calendar year. So we will start rolling out that programme in terms of those communications with businesses and with local householders. As soon as I say, it'll be a rolling programme in terms of when different properties and zones within, we have properties within Perth, and then obviously properties within some of the main towns across Perth and Kinross that will be connected. So it'll be a sort of rolling programme.
Thanks very much. Councillor Smith, you had your hand up there as well.
It's next to Dumb and Dumber here, so we're okay, right? It's one wee question here regarding the continuing to promote participation requests as a way for communities to be involved in public service area. The answer is no participation. Seems strange. Any answer to that?
Thanks, Councillor Smith. We've got somebody who can talk about participation requests. Fiona Robertson.
Sorry, my connection is terrible. Hope you can hear me. Yeah, thanks for the question, and it is a really good question. I think part of the answer, to be honest, is that this is a very well-meaning piece of legislation around promoting and encouraging communities and individuals to get more actively involved in how local public services are planned, managed and delivered. That is the intent behind it. That's why it's in the Community Empowerment Act, which is incidentally currently under review because it's been around as a piece of legislation for a few years now. I think part of the answer is that there are lots of other ways in which communities can and do get involved in local service planning and delivery. And they are numerous, whether you sit on a community council, whether you're involved in an asset management transfer, or if you're a local community hall, whether you're part of a local action partnership, which are the 7 local community planning boards, if you like, that we have across Perth and Kinross, whether you're contributing to the development of the Perth and Kinross offer, whether you're volunteering on an informal or a formal basis to make good things happen in your community. So my personal view around this is the intent behind participation request is good as a piece of legislation, but there's probably some thinking to be done both at national and at local level about how it becomes more meaningful and real for communities. And again, as per my previous answer on local asset transfers, yes, there is more we can and will do around this, but we do try to promote through infographics, social media, various other channels, these opportunities for communities to get more actively involved, not just in the work of the council, but other public authorities and what they are delivering at local level too.
Thanks very much. Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions. The committee has scrutinised the report, and I will now invite comments for recommendations to the other committees, Housing and Social Wellbeing and Environment and Infrastructure. Later this month, we will be considering this report. Councillor Forbes, you're the first one with a comment in the chat.
Thanks, Convener. I've got a couple of strands to this comment. I found the reports long. Now, I appreciate everything in life that we talk about is a balance, and I understand that the officers want to give us as much detail as they possibly can to allow us to scrutinise them properly. I think that's appropriate, but I think there's a balance here, and my feeling is the reports are just too long. It took me days and days to get through these and read them properly. So I wonder if the officers might want to have a think about whether they could be maybe just toned down a little bit or reduced in size or shape. The other thing that jumped out at me was actually what isn't there at all, and there was no reference certainly in this report, and I think to the same. I'm open to be corrected if I've missed something, but where things have gone wrong, and I'm not making any criticism of the council or anybody individually. It's a simple reality of life that an organisation the size of the council will get things wrong. And that's the best way to learn. But I didn't see anything in any of the reports that said this is what we got wrong and this is what we've learned from it. And I wonder if that's something that we could reflect on for the future.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Forbes. I think in terms of your first remark about the formatting of the report, the length of stuff, that is something that we will feed back into when we come to item 6D on the agenda, general discussion on format of annual performance reports and improvement plans. But also your point about identifying the gaps in performance is well made. There is a whole wealth of information here about good examples of practice within the community service, and it's not just the community service report. It will relate to the other ones that we'll come on to shortly. But we do need to clearly identify where those, be honest with ourselves, how we deal with failure is at least as important as how we deal with success. So we do need to identify those gaps, and identifying them clearly will give us the opportunity to make the recommendations for the continuous improvement that I was speaking about at the start of the meeting. Okay, are there any other comments? Nobody? I'm keeping a weather eye on the chat, although I think there's a slight delay. Okay, then I think the comments that we would, if I can just sum up, I think the comments that we would seek to pass on to the two other meetings of committees this month, the functional committees, the Housing and Social Wellbeing Committee and the Environment and Infrastructure Committee, are neatly summarised in the answers to the questions that we've received today, and also in terms of the formatting and identification of gaps in performance that Councillor Forbes has referred to, and I've just amplified on. Can we then agree to make those recommendations to those committees? Agreed. Thank you very much. We'll now move on then to item 6B on the agenda, which is the Education and Children's Services Joint Annual Performance Report and Joint Business Management and Joint Annual Performance Report and Business Management and Improvement Plan. I think Mrs. Devlin, Executive Director Devlin, will provide the introduction to this report. Director Devlin.
Thank you very much, Convener. The Joint Business Management and Improvement Plan for Education and Children's Services covers the period 2022 to 23, and the annual performance report for the service covers the period 2021 to 22. BMIPs, Business Management Improvement Plans, can perhaps be described as the link from the corporate plan and the local outcome improvement plan through to the service and team plans. For example, the strategic objective of developing education and informed citizens has some high-level priorities and associated key performance indicators in the corporate plan. They are expanded on in more detail in the BMIP. And in the service plans and the raising attainment strategy and report, these are broken down further into more specific actions and reported on more frequently at service level. Targets within the plan are a mixture of national and local, depending on the context, and the report highlights areas of good performance and does also outline some important areas where we do need to do better. There are a number of officers from across the service present, Convener, and they will be able to respond to any questions that members of the committee may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director Devlin. Questions from members of the committee? Anybody? All right, okay. Councillor Shires, yeah, if you're in the chamber, please just put your hand up.
Sorry about that, Convener. Obviously, this is an area that I'm quite familiar with, having been convener for the previous 5 years. And my question is a more general one to the Executive Director, and I think I probably know the answer, but it's maybe useful for other members to hear. So we have these reports, and then it sort of trickles down to school level where they have school improvement plans. And I suppose it's how do we make the links between the school improvement plans and service planning at a real grassroots pavement level. So how do we link that up with these higher level reports in order that we, for example, the stubborn inequalities that it refers to in the report, how do we link all of those up together so that we know that what's being done at the school level, for example, is actually tackling those bigger picture problems, so that we can deliver, particularly for children and young people, right, across the service. That's a really clumsy way of asking that question, but I suppose it's, go back to Bernadette Malone, it's that golden thread through it all, and how can we be confident that that thread is actually doing the job it's meant to be? That's so clumsy. Sorry, but I think Gina's looking at me like she knows what I'm saying. Yeah, so it's we've got these high level reports. We know that schools are working on the lower level reports that they deliver on a day-to-day basis, and how do we join it all together?
Director Devlin.
Thank you very much, Convener. Councillor Shires, in my introduction, there was, if we're thinking in golden thread and embroidery terminology, then there were some important stitches that I missed out. So I tried to make the connections for you between the corporate plan and the LOIP, the business management improvement plans, then on to the service plans. But you're absolutely right, because sitting in conjunction with those service plans, every single school is required to develop a school improvement plan and then produce a standards and equality report, which reports on their progress and performance in relation to what they set out to do. And every year across the service, whether that's within schools and education or whether that's within services for children and young people, those service level plans are then reflected in team or school plans, and importantly vice versa. And in terms of agreeing the priorities, then we absolutely do make sure that there's a connection all the way from the corporate plan through to school plans. And we also include, of course, the Integrated Children's Services Plan, which is the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaboratives Plan. And we can see reflecting through all of those exactly the same commitments. We will be guided by national legislative change that we are all required to work towards and adopt. And we are also, of course, using all of the data and information that we gather through various surveys, through asking questions and through looking at performance across all different areas. And those are the things that we then discuss in the context of schools without head teachers and agree what will be the broad areas of support that will be provided and resources that are available from a service perspective to support schools in that joint endeavour. So I hope that that helps reassure you that that golden thread does run all the way through, and it's not just always a case of top down, that actually bottom up does influence what happens further up the golden thread as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. So, okay, Councillor first.
It does, thank you.
Councillor Forbes, you're next with a question.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's quite a general question, but I'm going to use a couple of specifics just to help me make my point. I'm on page 80 of the report and it's on some of the performance targets. And it seems to me there's quite a predicted jump in targets. So just as an example, percentage of initial child protection case conferences within timescales, it was 71% in 2019, jumped up to 78%, fell back last year, presumably due to COVID, jumped forward to a target is quite high at 91%. So that's just one example. Is how confident are you that those targets are realistic and achievable?
Convener Hazel Robertson, Head of Services for Children, Young People and Families, is part of the meeting and would be happy to answer.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the question, Councillor Forbes. I mean, certainly that's one of the performance indicators that is very closely scrutinised, not just here, but also within the Child Protection Committee. It's something that we've certainly had concerns about in terms of the Child Protection case conference statistics. So we initially had some concerns around unborn babies, and that has definitely improved. You're correct in your assumption that COVID definitely had an impact and to some degree, but actually because of the nature of child protection, these conferences went ahead virtually wherever they were deemed to be appropriate. And certainly I can confirm that all visits to families where there were children where there were protection concerns actually went ahead in person throughout the whole of the COVID period. So the numbers, the targets are fairly arbitrary. They are something that we aspire to, and we keep very close tabs on, how that's being achieved. This is a multi-agency responsibility. So, I mean, the Child Protection Case Conference involves partners, all of the statutory partners and our voluntary colleagues as well. So a Child Protection Case Conference can be called by anyone, and there's a requirement for that to be chaired. We have instigated a single chairperson for case conferences, and we've definitely seen that improve consistency, and I think that is beginning to tell in our statistics for this year, and so we are continuing to monitor that very closely, and that will be reviewed in March when that post ceases.
And thank you, but Councillor Fox, you have a follow-up question.
Yeah, thanks, Convener, and Hazel, thanks for that and for that detail. My question I was hoping was more just in general. I just use that as an example about more targets. I just felt there was quite a few where they jumped. There was quite a target, quite an increase in target, and I just flicked forward to another one I'd circled, and it was on page 81. And again, I'm not looking really for the details of this one. It was just the fact that it seems quite a jump. Proportion of young carers with a completed young carer statement. It went from 30, jumped up to 65, fell back to 20, again, presumably because of COVID, but the target's 85, and the actual number has never been anywhere near 85. So I'm wondering why we got the target at 85. So more of a general thing than a specific, if you can, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the proportion of young carers with a completed young carer statement has been a relatively recent addition, so it was really unclear what the target should be. Our colleagues in PCABs are very involved in providing that, and for those young carers who have a particular need, we have a young carers worker who will do that young carer statement with those young people, but they're a very, very small percentage of the overall young carers. These are some of the discussions we've been having internally about, how are we going to establish what the targets are. And I would agree with you. I mean, I think these targets are very aspirational and something that, is not really been achievable to date, and something that we need to review.
Thank you, Hazel. Thanks.
Director Devlin, I think you wanted to come in on the broader point.
Thank you very much. On the broader point, Councillor Forbes, you'll see behind me, if you can see on my background, that the values that underpin the work that we do in education and children's services are about ambition, compassion and integrity. And the targets that we are setting are definitely ambitious, I would describe them as, but I think they're necessary. And they, I think, are probably good examples of where we have reviewed performance across the piece and recognised that there's a need for improvement. And in order to help affect that improvement, we have looked at how staffing might be restructured, refocused, and seeking to do better in all of these areas. So they're absolutely what you might call challenging targets, but nonetheless, they are targets which represent the ambition that we have in the service to absolutely do the very best that we can by all of our children, young people and families. And obviously, if we have set targets that we continue to either meet or exceed, then we would look to review those. And if we have set targets that we are not meeting over a period of time, then we would want to look quite closely at the reasons why that might be the case and understand if we perhaps required to be operating in different ways, or whether indeed the target in itself is inappropriate. But those would be matters for discussion and debate, and would be evidence-based and informed, Councillor Forbes. Thank you.
Thanks, Gina and Hazel, for that. Thank you.
Thanks. I wonder if I could just quickly follow up on those numbers that Councillor Forbes referred to about the proportion of young carers with completed young carer statement had leapt out at me as well. We are very far off target, but also from 1920 to 2021 to 21-22, there's a wild fluctuation there, and it can't be due to COVID, because the number is higher in the first year of, much higher in the first year of COVID, and then falls way back in the second year. What's the reason for that fluctuation is the specific question. And the general point, I suppose, is where we've got a fluctuation like that, it would be, can we get maybe narrative around that in the descriptor box below? That would be helpful.
Can I just add a little bit of clarity to that? I mean, in the narrative that you have there, you'll see that there were changes to the process to record young carer statements. That's only been introduced recently. So I mean, I think it's been certainly acknowledged that all young carers should have a young carer statement, and you'll see there are a large number who are targeted particularly by our young carer service within PCABs, and that it's important that all young carers who are referred will have their young carer statement recorded at that point, and that's a change in process which will definitely improve the percentage. And I mean, I think there's always the danger of just looking at the statistics. Actually these are young carers who are receiving services, who are being supported, but the actual young carer statement was standing as a separate element of that, and that is now being incorporated into that general referral that young carers are coming forward with their needs being assessed. So I mean, I think that will definitely also be factored into the overall statistics.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Childs, did you have anything to add to that? Mr. Charles, you're on mute.
Okay. Yes, sorry. Thank you very much. Yes, I think you make a very good point where, in particular, large fluctuations, but also actually any significant changes should be followed up with narrative to explain that, and certainly that's what we always endeavour to do. I think you rightly pick up there where that wasn't necessarily done fully, and we take that on board. But that is certainly the principle we try to adhere to, and we examine these reports in some detail to try and make sure that we do explain significant performance where that's necessary.
Great, thank you. Next is Councillor Robertson, I think.
Thank you, Convener. One of the biggest ever investments made in Kinrossshire was the Lochleven Community Campus, and it's a wonderful resource, and we're very fortunate to have such good high schools and community campuses throughout Perth and Kinross. But one of the things that people raise with me is that it isn't an educational resource for everyone, just for young people. And I was wondering what is being done to actually use the facilities that we have to help educate in a lifelong learning sense other people, and use it for things like cooking, photography, all these sort of things that it's got the facilities for, but can't be used. People just say they can't access it. And if there's anything going to be done in the future to address the inability of people to access the facilities that we currently have.
Director Devlin.
Thank you, Convener. In relation to your question, Councillor Robertson, we do actually have adult learners who do participate in a range of different academic classes and qualifications who can attend our schools and sit their national 4s, 5s and higher if that's what they wish to do, and participate in learning in that way. Throughout our campuses and our schools, there are a number of external organisations who are able to use the campuses and the schools in accordance with the current LETS policy, and within establishments that have been identified as being able to be supported through additional janitorial and facilities management staff to accommodate that. But one of the areas that we would like to look at and have as part of a forthcoming transformation project is how we can seek to extend that further across all of the estate of Perth and Kinross, so not just in relation to the campuses, but in relation to schools as well. And that's something that we'll be commencing work on in the not too distant future, if that's approved as one of the projects for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's helpful, but there is a general feeling that people aren't really allowed to access the campus after the school is closed. That they're not really encouraged to use there's a number of clubs here in Kinrossshire that have tried to use the facilities but have been rebuffed. So I would welcome any sort of change of emphasis that would encourage people to use the fantastic facilities we have for additional learning, not just I'm talking about academic learning, but vocational learning as well, and learning about life skills. So if you could just put that in the back of your mind and have a wee think about it, I would welcome that. Thank you.
Dr. Devlin again.
Thank you, Convener, for allowing me to comment. Councillor Robertson, if you've got specific examples that you wish to share with us, then we're very happy to look at that and pick that up out with this committee. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Councillor Shires, you're next.
Thank you, Convener. On page 71 of the report refers to the rollout of the parents portal. I'm sure that's very welcome by the busy admin staff in schools and parents that don't have to delve around in the bottom of school bags looking for bits of paper. But there will be an element of parents who are digitally perhaps not as able as others, or due to poverty or a variety of factors that might mean that access to online platforms are more of a challenge for them. And it was just to find out, to seek reassurance that we continue to find ways to work with those families. Really welcome the move to make it easier for people to access young people's bus pass, because I know there have been challenges with that across Perth and Kinross. So just to seek some reassurance around that area, and how we make sure that it's inclusive and that we don't end up sort of double doing the work, chasing up data from parents also, which possibly would defeat the purpose of moving to online.
Director Devlin.
Thank you very much. I can give you that reassurance, Councillor Shires, that we have had in place that runs in parallel with the rollout of parent pay, the means by which anybody who cannot access parent pay can still make cash transactions in a safe manner. So that is all in place, and that continues to be in place. And of course, the other side of the coin, if I may use that phrase, is about supporting those families who may be digitally excluded. And work has been underway over the past 2.5 years and continues to support that as well. So absolutely can give you that reassurance. And if I may just comment in relation to the young person's bus pass, that was something that we realised quite early on would take away the need for a separate application, that actually we could do that through the online portal for parents and families, and they have absolutely welcomed that. Thank you.
Vice Convener Bailey.
Thank you. If I could actually take you back to pages 80 and 81 in the report. So these are the ones that Councillor Forbes asked a few questions about a few moments ago. While looking at those, something interesting occurred to me, that actually through the targets headed care and equity, as well as the safe and protected, across every one of those indicators, we actually performed better in 2021, which was the year of the harshest COVID restrictions, than we did in the year prior, and interestingly in the year afterwards. So therefore I've got two questions. Do we have a good understanding of why it was that we did better against these indicators in the year of the harshest COVID restrictions? And then secondly, what lessons are we therefore taking from the different ways of working that we had, if indeed we do agree that we performed better during those harshest of restrictions on these really important measures around caring for our children and making them feel safe and protected? Thank you.
Who'd like to take that one?
I'm happy, Convener, to commence if that's okay. During that period, Councillor Bailey, we were required at very short notice to move almost all of our service delivery to online virtual, and that certainly enabled us to be very creative and very productive in terms of being able to access and arrange and hold meetings. And prior to that, most of the meetings would have been held in person. Not everything happened online during the most restricted periods of lockdown, but quite a lot of our work did. And as we have moved back into being able to do some of the work online, offline rather, and in person, we were just actually discussing yesterday the difference between how many meetings we might be able to hold on a virtual platform rather than in person, recognising that there will always be a requirement to have some meetings held in person, but right now we're in discussion about what is the right kind of balance around that. Is it around about the if you like, the apparent productivity of online against the potential benefits of some in-person meetings? And that's a discussion that we're having across all parts of the service, including educational psychologists, as well as within our social work teams as well. So it's something that we are looking to absolutely. We have a mantra of keeping the best of what has, happened over the past couple of years, and looking to see how we can have the best blended model in the future. And there may be some variation and fluctuation as we establish what that new best blend is. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really reassuring that we're looking to keep the best bits. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Hiya, yeah, I'd like to just ask a question under health and well-being, and it comes as a result of something that was emailed to me recently, and I just want to ask about pandemic outcomes, specifically with regards to mental health issues, probably for both teachers and kids, and behavioural issues in particular. I didn't see anything under the performance indicators with regards to targets or anything with regards to tackling this. So my question really is supportive in saying, do we have resources to recover fully after all of this, or is it going to be an ongoing and real challenge, and therefore how do we actually measure it and improvement?
Thanks, Councillor Allen. I know that this will be of high concern to all elected members and indeed residents across Perth and Ross, particularly parents. Director Devlin.
Thank you very much, and I see that Sharon has indicated she would wish to contribute if that's okay with you, convener. But to start with, in terms of the general question that Councillor Allen asked about recovery from pandemic, we have lots of evidence and research at a national, an international, and indeed at a very local level that shows us what the impact of periods of lockdown and living through the past 2.5 years have had on our children, young people, their families and our communities. And that information, which ranges from the kind of surveys that we've undertaken with pupils, with staff here, links up with that undertaken by a range of well-respected national and international organisations, such as the Education Endowment Foundation, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, etc. A key message that comes through all of that is that those who were perhaps already disadvantaged in a number of ways pre-pandemic have been most impacted negatively by the pandemic. And we recognised that very quickly. In relation to the amount of money that we have received to support our recovery plans, we have received considerable additional COVID monies from Scottish Government, and we have established clear spending plans for those that have been absolutely directed and targeted at those children, families and young people most affected. And we've taken a holistic approach to supporting families, so not just looking at the children in isolation of the context that they live in. And that has been reflected in new staffing posts that we've been able to allocate across nurseries and schools to help support with literacy and numeracy, to help support with health and well-being, and to help support with young people having spent long periods of time at home when schools were not open to all young people, have found that readjustment of coming back into school very challenging. And so there's additional supports also being provided there. Whether it's enough, I don't think that's a question that anybody can answer in terms of the amount of resource that we've had. All I can say to you, Councillor Allen, is that the money and the resources that have been made available to us have been used in a very targeted and appropriate way based on all of the evidence that we know. And therefore we will look at key indicators and see how those begin to shape up. So things like attainment in literacy and numeracy, attendance at school, the number of exclusions, for example, all of these are clear indicators of if we're getting back on track in line with where we were before. So the other big piece of work that is being undertaken across all 32 local authorities is looking to establish a series of stretch aims, and these are obviously not annual targets but over a longer period of time, and they relate to the wider national and then obviously translate to local recovery period. And those will be aims in terms of academic attainment, but also in terms of improved attendance at school and a whole range of other things. We will be bringing those to a lifelong, well, I was about to say lifelong learning committee, I should say to a new learning and families committee in the autumn, once they have been agreed and established, and that information will be able to provide it then, and it's something we'll then be able to report on through this committee as well. Convener, I have nothing else to say, and at this point, and Sharon may well want to contribute something that I've omitted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the Executive Director has responded to the question in exactly the way I would. I've got nothing further to add. Thank you.
Follow-up question, Councillor Allen.
Part of the question was, as I say, supportive, and it was to understand if you think that the behavioural issues at the schools have got worse, and have you got the capability or the support to be able to deal with that? I understand about attainment and the targets there. I don't see anything about tackling the behavioural issue. Thank you.
In relation to any behavioural issues, Councillor Allen, they will manifest themselves in many, many different ways. And we do monitor very closely, and we ask teachers to monitor all of that very closely within each individual school, and that information is aggregated up into service-wide information as well. Part of the work that we are undertaking is a review of a range of policies. So rather than specifically be thinking about a behaviour policy, but a whole range of different policies linked to personal and social education that would cover a wide range of subjects that would help young people exhibit the best kind of behaviour that we would want to see on a daily basis. In terms of the 18,500 young people or so that are across our schools, what we do know is that there is a small percentage who do find being at school full-time far more challenging than their peers, and therefore that's where the targeted support would come in for those young people. But the monitoring of behaviour in itself is not something that is easily done in any kind of large, strategic report like this. It's much more appropriate that we look at that on a class by class and a school by school, and then across different local management groups basis. And there's been significant work undertaken to look again at what we would call that broader inclusion agenda, because we are very keen to make sure that all young people who can be fully educated within mainstream settings are. And I mentioned earlier about different staffing models and posts that have been established using the additional monies that have come from the Scottish Government. Some of that is targeted not just at the academic, but also at the personal social development as well of young people, which would include helping young people manage and regulate their behaviour. And we're, again, through the transformation programme, we would plan to be taking forward a large scale piece of work that would involve a range of different services that would help to provide the right kind of supports to children, young people and families, from which we would expect to see a manifestation of positive behaviour from those that are involved. Thank you.
Okay. We have any further questions? Not seeing any come up in the chat. Okay then. We'll move on to the next step then. As Scrutiny Performance Committee, we have scrutinised this joint annual performance report and business management and improvement plan for the Education and Children's Service. I think this report will be going to the Learning and Families Committee. Yeah. I'll now invite comments, making recommendations that will be passed on to the Learning and Families Committee. Do we have any comments? Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener. I think report's excellent, and just a credit to the teams across Education and Children's Services who have really, really worked so hard over they always work very hard, but I think over the COVID period when they had to wholesale change the way that they operated, working with children and young people was just quite remarkable. And I think the detail in the report sort of backs that up. I think the point I was clumsily making at the start of it, though, was that the levels of reporting and indicators that are sort to be complied with right across the service, from school level and service level. There's a substantial amount of data that is collected, and I know from Paul Davison and his team, they're excellent at compiling all of that data into usable formats. And I look forward to those coming forward to the committee. I'll be interested to see how the new software and etc. that's used, how that makes the reports more user friendly, shall we put it, as they are quite. There's an awful lot of detail to condense into the report, so I look forward to seeing how that develops. I suppose one of the areas, perhaps, if we were looking for areas to have deeper delves into, is the whole area of ASN support across schools. We know that the numbers of children and young people with additional support needs is huge in Perth and Kinross, as it is across the country. But the way that we tackle that, and the resource implications across the service, and how budgetary decisions are taken, would be an area that I would particularly like to see us look at. I know it's referenced in the report, but if that was something that we could, as a committee, and I would be very keen to do that.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Shires. We've got any other comments? I think I would probably pull out again the responses to the answers that we were given, but in particular the recommendation for improvement from Councillor Robertson regarding access for clubs to use facilities out of hours, as I know that has been a recurring theme across some of the facilities. So I think we would add that one in. Councillor Allen, you had quite an extended bit on the health and wellbeing. Do you want to sort of summarise any recommendations for improvement in relation to that, or is it really just the sort of answers to the questions you were given?
I'd like to thank the officers for their responses. I don't think I quite got my message over as I had wanted, and I'll take it up with Sheena later on. It's not a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. And Vice Convener.
Thank you. I'd just like to second the comments from Councillor Shires that I'd also support a bit of a delve into and a bit of exploration of how ASN budgets and other things are allocated and arrive at the right people. Thanks.
Councillor Shires.
If I may, also on the financials, the budgetary, we know that we've had significant amounts of money, COVID monies, that have gone into education and children's services, quite rightly, and it's how we measure the impact of that cash injection, and whether it has, there'll be different ways of working that have been allowed to happen as a result of that funding, and if there's any opportunity to explore whether that, I'm being clumsy again, but whether that budget being more mainstreamed as opposed to a single injection, whether that actually deliver longer term results in improving outcome.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other comments from committee members. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Corporate and Democratic. Oh, I've just realised they've done these in the wrong order entirely. Apologies for that. I do propose to call a short recess at this point. We've been here for an hour and a half. I think it's appropriate for everybody to stretch their legs, particularly those joining online, to get a 5 or 10 minute break away from their screens. So if we could rejoin at 11:45, if the committee's in agreement. Getting nods all round. So the committee is in recess until 11:45. Okay. Thank you. That's our recess over. Everybody's returned to their places, certainly in the chamber. A note, Councillor Forbes, you will have to leave at 12 noon for notifying us. We'll now then move on to, apologies, I did say I was going to take the communities report before corporate and democratic services. What I've effectively done is swapped communities and corporate and democratic services round. I hope that's not too offensive to the proper running committee. We'll now proceed then to hear the annual performance report and business management and improvement plan for corporate and democratic services. That is going to be introduced by Mr. Taylor, who is our head of corporate IT and revenue and the council's chief digital officer. Mr. Taylor.
Morning. Thank you very much, everybody. I've asked to introduce this paper in Corporate and Democratic Services, BMIP. Corporate and Democratic Services is made up of a number of functions: finance, legal and governance, HR. Sorry, apologies. Corporate and Democratic Services is made up of a number of functions, including finance, legal and governance, HR, property, IT, and revenues and benefits. And we provide a range of services direct to businesses and households, as well as services to our colleagues within communities and education and children's services. As the paper says, the joint service BMIPs and APRs are going to this committee and then the service committee, which for Corporate and Democratic Services is the Finance and Resource Committee next Wednesday. The BMIP is for the period 22-23, and the annual performance report looks back to the last financial year, 21-22. The plan identifies a range of key priorities for the coming year, and it's not a detailed plan, it's a high level and strategic plan as agreed last year in response to COVID. Because our KPIs tend to be council-wide, we have used a range of case studies to highlight the breadth of work that we undertake within the service. And we will report back to this committee and our service committee in November with the 6-monthly BMIP update as usual on progress. We have a range of members from the CDS-SMT and our extended management team that are here today to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Have we got any questions on corporate and democratic services performance report and improvement plan? Second chat catch up. Oh, Councillor Shires is going analogue rather than digital.
I've given up on it, yeah.
Councillor Shires.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I had a question going back again to 5.3 about the new performance management software system. And there was just a bit of background to this and asking, do we, how do we look at what other local authorities do? And is there a similar system being rolled out in other local authorities that we benchmark it, etc.? Will that help with that kind of level of analysing how well we perform versus other local authorities? And my other question was around transformation and streamlining the particularly finance function across various different services, so that we haven't got, you know, a duplication of effort in various council.
Mr. Taylor.
In terms of your first question, Councillor Shires, the managing performance reporting is now known as PK Performs. That's what was discussed earlier during the community's BMIP by Carol Henry. IT are mainly in an advisory role there, but there is an implementation team that's been meeting fortnightly since May, led by Paul Davison, as mentioned earlier. And they will be looking at what is available and implementing that. I understand they're implementing the risk module first, but they will be looking at what is out there. And the system is being provided by an organisation called CAMS, which will be used by other public bodies as well.
Councillor Shires?
Yeah, thank you for that. I suppose it's just looking for an understanding for those of us that are not very technically minded, but that, you know, if we are benchmarking with other local authorities, you know, Renfrewshire or wherever, are they using similar systems so that, you know, it just, for my not very technically minded mind, you know, does that then make it easier when it comes to the actual level of detail that we're benchmarking again?
Apologies, Carol Hendry.
Hi, Councillor Shires, if I can maybe answer that. I think we have a lot of benchmarking that we do and gets reported to councils through the LGBF framework, and that seems to be the key thing that even Audit Scotland use for benchmarking. So yeah, that will form part of, but not the only benchmarking we will do. So our performance indicators are only part of the story, I suppose. It depends on the policy decisions each local authority makes, so that's what makes benchmarking particularly difficult. But it's also how we can learn from what other local authorities to do. So I suppose that I think what I was mentioned earlier was that it will enable us to do more of that kind of benchmarking, because we spend an awful lot of time at the moment just collating information that tends to be in silos and not necessarily accessible to all. So I think hopefully the system will allow information to be more accessible so that reports like you've got presenting today will not get bogged down in all sort of that level of detail, and that you can access, that data can be accessed, outcomes, updates on outcomes, whether it's risks as well, will be more accessible to people, including yourselves. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It does, and I think that would be welcome by everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Mackenzie, did you want to come in as well? Head of Finance?
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, councillors. I'm conscious I'm joining you online. Can everyone in the chamber hear me? Great, thank you very much. Councillor Shires, if I can take the second part of your question, which was on the finance review. Members will be aware that officers are proposing to present to council at the end of June a strategy on transformation and change, and one of the threads of that strategy is consolidation of activities across the council. So we have a number of services which are currently devolved and dispersed, and what we're looking to do is build on the good work which is currently being undertaken. So those teams do collaborate quite extensively. We do meet frequently, but to build on that work, to look at our business processes and to look for improvements and efficiencies where those can be generated. So I hope that gives you some sense of the background. It's at a high level at the moment. There'll be more detailed work undertaken over the coming months.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Forbes, you're next.
Thanks, Convener. I've got three really quick questions. Do you want me to stop in between and see if anybody else has a question, or will I just keep going?
Carry on. Do you want to do them one at a time for quick fire answers, or
yeah,
they
please?
all relate?
Yeah.
Okay,
they're totally different questions, different parts, but I didn't want to jump ahead of anyone else that might want to ask a question, but I'll just crack on. Straightforward, I think relatively straightforward questions. I'm on the report on page 9, the box highlighted developing people, skills and capacity. It's a reference to staff availability, and I'm wondering if we are suffering the same as most businesses at the moment in the difficulty of getting staff and keeping staff. That's my first question.
Who's going to pick that one up? Okay, Pauline Johnson, HR Manager.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. We are in the same position in terms of certainly some occupations are very difficult to fill. Overall, we do offer opportunities within the council to move staff, and that's a lot of where our promoted posts come from, but from some areas we do have difficulties and shortages of occupational groups, such as HGV drivers, some of the social care roles that we're doing a recruitment drive to actually promote as a career. And we've made some changes to those groups, and they're part of our corporate workforce plan for 21-23. So we're working with services to identify areas that are hard to fill and how we can actually work better to grow our own and to improve our talent pool. But the supply chain is short. We've not got the same turnover rates. That's the second half of your question. In terms of staff leaving, that's staying steady at the normal rate.
That's great. Thanks for that answer. I'm glad that you're aware of it and something's at least trying to be done about it. My second question is on page 23, and it's the reference to how our suppliers of software are moving largely to cloud-based services. And I'm wondering if the net result of moving over to these cloud-based services is that we spend more money on software, or do we spend less money on software? I guess that you won't have the answer specifically to hand, but a general feel would be helpful.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes, in terms of the question, Councillor Forbes, we are basically heading in the direction of the cloud, because that's the direction of travel that a number of companies actually prefer, and that is therefore the direction that they tend to be taking us on. That specifically applies to the new HR payroll resource link and the replacement for Swift Mosaic. They will both be cloud-based. I would suggest that we can have a detailed look at this. I would suggest that in terms of the finances, it's a marginal issue because obviously we still maintain servers, etc. within the council. But Dave Adams is on the call, and I'm not sure if David want to add anything else to what I've said.
Good morning. Just yeah, I can just add a little bit, Alan. From experience to date, there are additional costs in moving systems out to the cloud, and yeah, as you say, they'll be balanced against perhaps less servers within the council, but I mean that would just be a minimal saving. So in general, yeah, Councillor Forbes, the answer is it would be more expensive in moving these systems out.
Thanks. I got the feeling from what you said, though, it's not a huge amount of money. It's pretty much the same, but maybe slightly more expensive. Is that fair?
It's in some cases it might be substantially more, but that is a system by system basis, so it's hard to generalise in terms of how much. But yeah, it's certainly more expensive.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, convener, for indulging me. My third and certainly at the moment last question is on page 15, and it's the I'm frightened to say this word, and I think it's called phishing. Terrified to get that wrong. When was the last test of this? I think you'd call it an exercise, cyber resilience or something like that. I remember being embarrassed because I got caught up in one and accidentally clicked a link, which really embarrassed me. But when was the most recent version of that?
I think there's some, sorry, Councillor, there's been some small scale exercises, but what we're actually looking to do next year, hopefully, is to do some planned larger scale exercises to test our resilience as part of the implementation and development of our cyber resilience plan. I don't have the exact date as to when but probably there hasn't been a large scale exercise since pre-COVID, because I think that was tempting fate doing a phishing exercise whilst we were trying to operate virtually. So what we've done is we've provided advice, technical guidance, awareness, briefing, one-to-one sessions, team sessions, to make sure that people have been more aware of phishing. But I don't think we've actually done a big tested exercise recently, but there will be ones coming in the future.
Thank you, and I presume, Lisa, you'll not tell anybody when it's coming, or else it would defeat the purpose.
We won't be giving you advance warning, no.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, convener. That's me done for the moment. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Maybe if I could just chip in there. I appreciate why we wouldn't want to have done a phishing exercise drill during a period where far more people were using online access. But one of the things that would be a key element of risk would be what I think is called properly a multiple failure mode. So it's our ability to respond to a crisis while there is already another crisis going on. So maybe just worth bearing in mind for the future. So, for example, I think an early example in the pandemic was, everybody's having to socially distance, and then we get a flooding event. So how do we manage the process of everybody coming together to respond to the flooding event while we're also being told to socially distance? Do you want to come back in on that, Head of Legal and Governance?
It's just to provide assurance that that risk was we were more than acutely aware of that potential risk, and work was being done. The information security team were practically in daily contact, I think, with the IT team to ensure that all of these risks were being monitored. We were particularly vigilant around these particular risks, knowing how important it was to maintain the integrity of our virtual platform.
Thank you very much. Have we got any other questions from either the chamber or online? Otherwise, I've got a couple. So I'll pick in then. My questions are on what I'm not seeing. There are a few performance indicators towards the end of the report on page 31 or page 41 of our document packs. So they're about what I think would be potentially useful targets. Just to give people advance warning, I think I'll come to Mr. Taylor first and then Mr. Crawford. Would it be appropriate to have a target for percentage of invoices sampled that were paid within 30 days? I had a conversation with a constituent who's a small business person who was having trouble with cash flow because of late payments by a council. You will be glad to know that it wasn't this council, but another local authority in Scotland. But is that the sort of thing that there should be a target against? I thought there were maybe even legislative requirements around payment times for invoices by the public sector. Mr. Taylor.
I actually think Stuart Mackenzie, Head of Finance, will probably want to come in on this one because it's his indicator. But I know that, for example, teams that I've managed in the past that pay invoices actually regularly monitor their targets. They have targets, they monitor their payment, they celebrate success because it's obviously very important for them to hit these targets. So I know that when I was managing invoices being paid for social care, for example, that was something that was a high priority for the teams involved. But Stuart Mackenzie will provide more detail.
Thank you. Mr. Mackenzie, Head of Finance.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Alan. I'm just going to build on what my colleague Mr. Taylor has just said there. So during the pandemic, just for members' awareness, our terms of business, our normal terms of business are payment within 30 days of receipt of goods and services. During a pandemic, we moved to payment within 7 days. We had to do that globally because the resources required to do that on an individual supplier basis were disproportionate. So we moved payments to 7 days and put quite a lot of effort into ensuring that. That benefited local businesses, but it also benefited those larger organisations with deeper pockets. We also took on board any requests for advance payment or more prompt payment in emergencies and extremis during that period. So I trust, Councillor Stewart, that your constituent wasn't overly concerned about payment from Perth and North Council. In terms of monitoring performance against the 30-day target, as Mr. Taylor has said, we have arrangements to do so. I think those arrangements require a little bit more investment as we move from response into recovery and beyond. So that's an area we'll be keeping under review. but we have managed to maintain a fairly proactive approach to the payment of our suppliers, both local and national, over the last 2 years.
Thanks, Mr. Mackenzie. No, it definitely wasn't this council, so you can rest assured. However, just to follow up, sorry, I think Mr. Taylor said that there are internal targets. My question was also whether there is I thought there was a legislative requirement potentially for the public sector to pay especially small businesses within a certain amount of time, and I just wondered whether either taking the internal target or if the legislative requirement, if there is one, and translating that into an actual target that we can see on the paper here might be useful.
Thank you, Convener. From memory, I think that target is advisory rather than statutory, but I'm happy to refresh my recollection on that point and confirm that for the committee. And it is a performance indicator we could use in the future for the BMIP.
Okay, thanks very much. Maybe if you refresh your memory before this paper goes to presumably finance and resources. I'm getting nods here, and that could be one recommendation. Some other target related questions from Mr. Crawford, I think, are about the whether we should have targets on the proportion of operational buildings suitable for their use and proportion of internal floor area of operational buildings which is in satisfactory condition. We've got those figures reported, but there don't seem to be targets against them. I don't know if there are internally. Mr. Crawford, Head of Property.
No, there are no targets on that. The statistics used every year based on condition surveys and discussions with our own staff. We are working with staff. We're working with to upgrade the building to deal with any condition issues, and they're all part of our planned programme, capital and revenue. There are no targets. It would be great to say 100% would be a target, but again, some of the buildings will never get up to 100% without large capital program.
Okay, thanks very much. Have we got any more questions? Councillor Allen.
It's also a question on the key performance indicators. I noticed that the sick absence days per employee non-teaching staff have gone from 8.3 in 2021 to 10.9 in 21-22. Is there an underlying reason for that apart from COVID? Is there anything that can be shared with that?
Thanks, Councillor Allen. Mrs. Johnson, our HR manager, can come back. I think these numbers are unrelated to COVID, is my understanding. But you can you'll be more expert at answering the question than I.
Yeah, the COVID absences were treated differently and did not form part of the sickness absence figures for the last year when COVID was prevalent. So the sickness reasons went down, the general sickness reasons, and we do think that's went back up again on the basis that we've got increased contact and transmissibility in the community from colds and flus, respiratory illnesses that weren't prevalent when people were predominantly at home during the previous year. And also we're thinking that some people's immune systems have been affected by that isolation, as if you like, because they weren't mixing, and therefore their weakened immune system means that they're more susceptible to a normal respiratory sick cold. Also, working from home meant that people didn't report sickness in the year that we were in lockdown. So it meant that what was happening was people were tending to be able to work from home because they weren't having to come in and actually mix with others and still felt well enough to work in their own home. So I suppose that's impacted as people have then returned to offices and started to mix, and that's meant that our sickness figures have started to increase again as a result of that.
Just to come back on that, thank you for that answer. That's great. And somebody who succumbed to COVID and is never ill, I can associate with that. Is there a long-term statistic? I mean, there's two years there, which doesn't really tell anybody anything. Where I'm trying to go with that is, I mean, 25% increase year on year. When you're looking at 2 years is quite dramatic, but over a number of years, such as 5 or 6 different years, that could paint a completely different picture. And I know that there isn't one here, but are we likely to have targets on sick absence?
There is no actual target that we've got in terms of sickness absence, but our figures are returning to where they were pre-pandemic, and that's been a stable place for us in terms of the local government benchmarking framework. As a council, we sit quite high in that area in terms of the national average for sickness levels. So it might seem high, but it's compared to the other local authorities that were in terms of the benchmarking, we're quite stable in terms of our sickness absence rates. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. And I think Mr. Taylor wants to come in as well.
Yes, in answer to your question about further information, not targets, but the information that's here on the paper, there's a link to PK Performs that shows you 5 more years for all the stats that are here. We've just shown the 2 years that we would say are comparable because of COVID years, but for everything that's here, there's 5 more years when you go and click on the online link, PK Performs.
Great, thank you for that. Am I seeing any more questions in the room or online? No. Okay then, as a committee we have scrutinised the annual performance report and business management improvement plan for corporate and democratic services. I'll now open it up for comments. Recommendations to go to the Finance and Resources Committee for targets, areas of concern, anything that we would like them to consider including when they agree and approve this report. And Councillor Allen.
It's just to back up the various things that you said, Convener. Under the other areas that we looked at today, they did have performance indicators and targets, and I don't see any here. And not to suggest that there has to be a target for everything, but there are certain areas where you can look at targeting to try and reduce things. I come from a background where they did actually target to reduce sick absence, for instance, and that was the reason for asking the question. And it might be helpful to look or at least consider performance indicators that include targeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Taking those comments on board, have we got any other suggestions? No. Can we agree those recommendations then and move on to the next item? Agreed. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda, is the general discussion on the format of the annual performance reports and business management improvement plans. I think we have probably largely covered that in the foregoing discussions, but I certainly had some recommendations looking through these to make for officers' consideration for future years. I think somebody had suggested earlier in the meeting that we maybe have an offline discussion or working meeting to consider in more detail the formats. I think that would certainly be useful from the comments from elected members today, and probably possibly also from the discussions that I've had with conveners in advance of these papers coming to this committee. But one item would be to look at the, and I know that this is tricky and I know that there are reasons for it, but the timing during the year. So obviously the business manager, the annual performance reports relate to the previous year, but by the time that information is compiled, we're already partway through the year that the business management improvement plan relates to. I think we should also consider, in many cases, the key performance indicators are set by those arise out of either the national targets or the local government benchmarking framework. I think we should consider the implementation of more locally chosen targets, so that elected members in Perth and Ross Council have a more direct influence over the areas that we wish to target. I think it is slightly difficult, and I understand that from discussions with officers, the head of legal and governance in particular, that these reports have grown to try and answer multiple different questions from different committees. So in terms of prior scrutiny committees, we're looking at performance. In terms of trying to, as well as reporting on performance and gaps, they're trying to showcase examples of good practice, although sometimes, for example, that the showcasing of the good practice may be unrelated to whatever the focus area that it's a subheading of is. I'll pick one example. But we had a focus area in the community's annual performance report, delivering on actions outlined in the local child poverty action report, and further reducing child poverty in Perth and Ross. Obviously, we would all agree with that. There was a specific item relating to supporting the availability of affordable childcare and public transport to support parental employment. And then the first item under there is about funding community transport and two demand responsive community transport teams in West Kinross, schemes in West Kinross and Kinloch Rannoch. That item on its own doesn't tell committee, for example, or it doesn't tell officers indeed as well, whether the public transport did support parental employment with a view to reducing local child poverty in Perth and Ross. So what we need to make sure is that the updates and the performance updates relate directly back to the focus area. I think it would be useful for officers to consider, and indeed elected members to consider, whether the business management improvement plans, instead of just being the what we've identified in these reports today as priorities and key areas for focus, whether they should potentially be, and I understand that they are then cascaded down through divisions and teams, but whether they should be SMART objectives, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time bound. And it would also be helpful, I think, if it was a bit clearer about which areas of the report were annual performance and which ones are the improvement plans going forward, because the improvement plans are scattered about throughout those reports. I've got another suggestion, which is a follow-up to that, but not directly related. So I'll let Councillor Robertson come in.
Thank you, convener. My problem with today's meeting in particular is to do any of these reports justice, we'd almost have to have the whole meeting based on one report. And when you think that all the reports we're discussing will have already gone before the committee that is responsible for them, it almost seems like a duplication of a task which sort of doesn't really, I don't think it's the best use of our time. You said in your introduction today that you thought that we should be more focused in our scrutiny function, and perhaps going through reports that have already been scrutinised by other committees doesn't really do that. I think we should actually target our resources and target our officer time into looking at areas where we know there's issues and where we can actually make a real difference that aren't tackled by other service and committees. But that's my view. And I think we need a much more targeted scrutiny function, personally. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Robertson. Just to be clear, this year we are seeing, as the Scrutiny Performance Committee, we are seeing the annual performance reports and business management improvement plans first. They are then going to the service committees over the remainder of June. I did consult prior to the meeting with the conveners of those committees, and they were all happy for those these papers to come to us first, because they wanted us as a Scrutiny and Performance Committee to look at these papers and suggest areas for improvement. And so that's what we've been trying to summarise in terms of the areas for improvement going forward. I do take your point that you know, in order to identify every single possible improvement or answer every single possible question, then we would be spending a couple of hours per paper. I think that's what we're trying to reflect in terms of condensing the information into a more concise, comprehensible, easy to use format, so that in future years we'll have shorter reports and we can provide even more constructive feedback in terms of identifying the areas for improvement and making those recommendations to. We are only a scrutiny committee, we can't decide policies, but making the recommendations to those service committees in terms of what objectives they should adopt going forward. Mrs. Mailer, did you want to come in? Yeah.
Thank you, convener. I think I'll just come in with just a few comments in response to the feedback that we've received this morning, and indeed the comments that have just been made more recently. And I think, first of all, thank you very much for everybody's comments and feedback. I think it's been really helpful for us in terms of informing, I think, the next sort of version, or the revised version, of the annual performance reports and the BMIP. So just by way of a little bit of a context, our corporate plan, our current corporate plan, finishes this year, and we are due to review the corporate plan. So a revised corporate plan will come back to council later on this year. That then presents us with an opportunity to then review the format and the reporting of our annual performance reports, and indeed our BMIP. As we have discussed, the current format does reflect, I think Lisa has obviously had that conversation before, does reflect some of the feedback that we've had in the past from elected members. We're frequently asked to provide a greater level of detail. However, I think more recently feedback from elected members has been, can we strip that back a bit and actually provide some more information, more sort of aligned with the infographics. And those of you will recall our corporate annual performance report, the local government benchmarking framework report, which is much more visual and has infographics within it, and then the opportunity to drill down with links behind it if needed to see the detail that sits behind that. So our Performance Policy and Resources Group, which consists of officers from across the council involved in performance activity, have recognised that the current format, content and feel does need to be refreshed. We've been undertaking some benchmarking exercises with other local authorities in terms of format and style, and that, alongside more recent feedback from elected members and indeed the discussions that we've had today, I think we're hearing a clear sense of too much narrative, less text, more infographics. Let's kind of pick them up and align them more with the style of the annual performance report, the local government benchmarking framework. We also recognise that we need to maybe sort of reflect some other areas that we've moved on since. So, for example, the Perth and Kinross offer. Where are we seeing the voices of community and the involvement of communities? The impact, so what question? What difference are we making? What's the cumulative impact of all of the different work that we're taking? So I think answering some of the smart questions there. Definitely hearing feedback here today in terms of where we're not doing quite so well, and I think that is a key point. I think we need to highlight that more in terms of the challenging, the reasons why we're maybe struggling to meet some of the targets. So basically the new look and new style, we will be pulling that together. We've got the new corporate plan that will set the direction for the new look going forward. Over and above that, we also are currently refreshing our self-evaluation toolkit and assessment. We call that How Good Is Our Council? That will give us a far greater focus by services who review the How Good Is Our Service alongside the How Good Is Our Council, and that will be reflected as well next year. In terms of our performance reporting, there's also been a view that we need to maybe do some more drip feeding rather than, I think, as we've just described, very detailed information, and make sure that we're getting some of that information out to our communities. Charlene Guild is on the call, I think, who heads up our corporate performance team. I don't know, Charlene, if you want to add any more that I've perhaps missed in that brief overview in terms of our plans ahead for an improved new look BMIP and APR.
Yeah, thanks for that, Claire, and thank you, convener, for your comments and for the rest of the members for feedback there on our reporting and the BMIPs in particular. So as Claire said, we will be reviewing this process. We have been doing a lot of benchmarking with other local authorities to make sure that we are looking at what else is going on out there, what's working for other local authorities. What I would say is, if I could just pick up on one of the comments that the convener made around about the links with things like child poverty and public transport. One of the things that we are doing is that we're baselining our performance indicators, and we're doing that through a number of different ways. So one of the ways is the children's scorecard, and we have to make sure that we link to other strategies. So I think what would be incredibly helpful is, as the convener suggested, was to have an offline discussion about how we can take this forward in terms of the format, the structure, the consistency, and even the conciseness of the reports. But I think it was music, certainly to my ears, and I'm sure the team's ears, in terms of a more concise, short, punchy and to the point report moving forward. So always happy to hear that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks to officers for that. The other point that I was going to mention was a follow-up to the Scrutiny Committee's discussion on these last year. I think one of the things that we asked for, but I'm not aware that we've had so far, is just a methodology to be demonstrated to committee members for actually closing out these actions. So where we've got something that we're identifying as a priority or a key focus area for the current year, and that's broken down into the team objectives, and then that's tracked presumably through weekly or monthly meetings until it's closed off or cannot be closed, whatever it is. It's actually just to see that methodology working. Possibly it's done differently per service or even by department within the services, but it would be useful just to see that loop getting closed. So if we can add that to the action tracker as well, this action tracker is great. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for the comments and input on those reports. Item 7 on the agenda then, there are no further comments, we can move on, is the annual governance statement for 21-22. The Vice Convener is going to lead discussion on this item.
Thank you. So yeah, item number 7 is the annual governance statement 21-22, and I'll hand over to you, Lisa Simpson, as Head of Legal and Governance Service, to introduce the paper if you wish to. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Councillors, this is the annual governance statement which we are required to attach to the draft accounts, which will be coming before the Special Audit Committee at the end of the month for then sign off in September. The governance statement follows the guidance that is contained within the SIPFA framework of good governance in local government. This sets out a number of principles and areas where we need to be testing our systems of internal control. The process has been undertaken where there is quite a rigorous process of self-assessment happening at service level. Also, those key officers who have responsibility for governance functions across the organisation, so myself as the monitoring officer and the head of legal and governance, the Section 95 officer, the corporate manager for procurement, human resources, information governance and security, etc. So there are separate areas whereby these professional and technical experts have given their assessment and assurance of that. The process and the evidence that is gathered is also then scrutinised by the Policy and Governance Group, which is a multidisciplinary group, an internal group of officers. That's been led this year by Jackie Clark, who you will know as our Chief Internal Officer, but is also the Service Manager for Audit and Governance. And if she will be able to give any more information and detail as to the actual process of assurance. But the primary message that comes out is that our source of internal control and our systems internal control are robust and effective, adequate and appropriate. There are areas where we would look to improve on certain areas, and these will be captured, and this will be reflected again in team plans, BMIPs, service plans, depending on the nature of the area that we want to focus our activity on. I'm happy to take questions. There are other key officers available to answer specific questions. And Jackie, I don't know if you want to add anything at this particular point.
Not at this particular point, thanks. I think you've pretty much summarised the process so far.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the chamber or from those attending virtually? Okay, so we are asked that we note the contents of the report and provide any comments. So therefore, I'll turn this over to any comments. Any comments from anybody? I'll perhaps jump in and fill the silence here a moment. I was intending to ask questions about cyber resilience on this paper, but they were well covered in response. I think it was Councillor Forbes's questions around the sort of emergency drills on the CDS BMIT report earlier. So I'm more than happy with that. So one last call for any comments before we go ahead and I seek agreement to note the report. Good, nice, easy first paper to take. So does the committee agree to note the report? Thank you. Back to you, Colin.
Thanks, Vice Convener. So we move on to the final topic in the agenda today, which is scrutiny and performance reviews, a call for topics. I think we could probably expand this out into a call for any reports that we would like to see as well. But specifically, do any, as I indicated at the beginning, I think the committee will be most constructive and useful in terms of progressing an agenda of continuous improvement if we pick identified areas for a deeper dive rather than just taking the reports and asking questions and rubber stamping them. We do need to go deeper into some topics. So I would like to open it up to members of the committee in the first instance to suggest any topics for review. I think in the fullness of time, we will, once we've got our initial call for topics for review and from members of the committee, we'll widen that out and ask. I've looked at a number of governance documents which emphasise the importance of bringing members of the public into scrutiny as well. But initially, do we have any topics for review? If not, I've got a couple. Councillor Shars.
So mentioned earlier the ASN vision of schools. That's an area that particularly to try and make sure that we align budgets with, we have our schools. And another area that is of interest, and I think we probably share this, convener, is the role of the Action Partnership. And they are placed within, if their objective is about tackling inequality, are they actually doing that, and are they set up in a way to do that how I know there's obligations on us from the previous stuff we did around participatory budgeting and making sure that the public have a role in and I'm not really seeing that the actual partnership model is going to deliver on any area. I'm sure there'll be others in our group that have views, but obviously a lot of elected members are still quite new, so actually maybe timing of calls for items from across the elected members would be important to let people get their feet under the desk so we can see which areas they have a take.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. Two good suggestions there. I do take your point that obviously a lot of most of the committee members are newly elected, so will require to get time to get their feet under the table. But I do want to, as Councillor Bailey was indicating earlier, get started on an early programme of prioritising what these views might be. Got any other suggestions? No, I don't have the chat on screen. Councillor Allen.
This might be out of order and you stop me if I have to. I'm brand new at this. It's more an observation rather than a topic for next time. I know there's been a couple of questions today that might have been easier answered if we had somebody available from the Scottish Government. Is it appropriate to have somebody online from the Scottish Government to answer that question or those questions? I'll give you an instance we asked earlier on about internet access R100 and we didn't have the answer.
Thanks, Councillor Allen. I think possibly if we were doing a review of a particular area, a scrutiny or performance review of a particular area, and it was, as you say, within then we could ask it within the purview of the Scottish Government. Then we could ask somebody along from the Scottish Government to give evidence or something like that. I'm not sure we would necessarily get any commitment for a regular attendee from the Scottish Government, but I can certainly ask. Councillor Bailey. Oh, I beg your pardon, sorry, you're right. Councillor Robertson first.
Thank you, Convener. I like the suggestions that Councillor Shears put forward, but can I suggest that you, as the Convener, write to all elected members and say that this committee would welcome suggestions from them of areas that they would like us to look at.
Thanks, Councillor Robertson. I was going to include that in my summary, that I would extend the invite to all elected members. I was just asking the members that are here today. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you. The topic I'm about to mention is probably one that suits more a report to this committee or perhaps even just a briefing note rather than a full scrutiny review. And it's something that came up and was raised with me by 3 different members of the public during the recent election cycle. And that was the higher level question of, with the matter of the spaces for people or the improved, the announcement of funding for improvements to cycling and walking provision, specifically on the Dunkeld Road, it feels like to an outside observer, we went very quickly from a position where a Scottish Government minister came and I believe stood outside the concert hall and announced a pretty large funding package for that, to a position where we're now back in a cycle of having to reapply for that. It'd be very good to understand what happened and how we changed dates between those 2 positions, and also what lessons we have learnt, or whether we need to make representations to other bodies about how that transition happened, because I'd like to hope it wasn't due to lack of ambition here locally, but I don't mean to cause the debate to happen today, just to table the question, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Councillor Shires. Oh, it's a digital legacy comment in the chat. Okay. If there are no other comments or suggestions from members online, I think the 2 suggestions that I would have are ones that I've made previously. The the Council's National Planning Performance Framework. The Council's own performance within that, I don't think has ever come to committee, and I think it would be useful if we could scrutinise our performance in that area. And also back in at the November meeting of the Scrutiny Committee in the previous term, we had a report on Business Gateway. We did have follow-up actions which are detailed in the minutes, which I trust the clerk will add to the action tracker. But there was a further discussion to be had about whether we wanted to do a review. All we had was a report summarising the current status in a question and answer session. So I'll certainly add the Business Gateway, not Business Gateway performance. I think we satisfied ourselves on that point, but the Business Gateway funding model issue. So I shall add that to the list of topics. As I say, Councillor Bailey and I will invite all elected members to input suggestions for topics for scrutiny reviews, and we will come back to the next meeting of the committee with a list of priorities that we are suggesting, hopefully terms of reference for the first of those reviews. And just to say on the wider point, you know, if there are community councils out there, members of the public who do have suggestions, we have got a series obviously here of reviews that we will need to consider and prioritise, but if there are any other areas that members of the public would like to feed in on, they can find either myself or Councillor Bailey's contact details on the council website, and we're more than happy to hear suggestions from community councils, members of the public, community groups as well. Unless there are any further comments then, does that sound acceptable to members of the committee? Can we proceed on that basis? Well, thank you very much for your attendance at this first meeting of the new Scrutiny Performance Committee. I think we've got through a great amount of business, and thanks to all elected members for their engagement and for officers for their attendance and knowledgeable answers to the questions posed to them. And with no further business, I conclude this meeting of the committee. Thank you all.